And in New York City, just to take another example, we've had 30, 40 years of an attempt to realize Rockefeller's dream of the 1970s, which is a city which is no longer a city of working class control, working class power, working class community associations. It's going to be a city which is going to be the playground of the rich. And step by step, what we've seen is that in the Bloomberg administration has in fact consolidated in incredible ways that desire. But also, notice this, we have more mega development projects going on in New York City than almost ever before. Talk about the absorption of the surplus. And talk about the way in which even middle income housing and that is being actually transformed into upper income stuff. I mean, it's just going on at an incredible kind of pace. Which raises the question, where on earth are the people coming from? How can people live who don't have that money to be able to pay, you know, $1 million for an apartment in Manhattan? One of the problems we have right now is with a falling dollar, a lot of Europeans are saying, well, I can have a pied-à-terre in New York City right now. So there's a vast inflow of investment. In fact, one of the biggest groups that's investing in this is the Irish. So the Irish that have become wealthy are now buying up condominiums like crazy in New York City. Because, you know, the euro is where it's at, you know. I mean, this is kind of, but that's catastrophe for the local population. And I was reminded of this the other day because I came into Kennedy Airport 5 o'clock in the morning, and I get on an E-train coming in from Kennedy Airport on the subway around 5:30 or 6, and I was amazed, I shouldn't have been, but I was amazed to find the train was packed, absolutely packed. And it was packed, 80% of the people in there were women, 80% of the 80% were, quote, people of color, and they were all headed into Manhattan to wake Manhattan up. They were living out there, hour and a quarter away, hour and a half away from central Manhattan, and they looked dead tired. They were all kind of half asleep. That time of the morning, going into the city, and this is how the city's being serviced. Does Bloomberg care about that population? Does their right to the city bear anything? In fact, we're beginning to see in New York City something that's been seen in Paris, which is the suburbanization of the low-income population, as indeed the city gets so gentrified, and we're beginning to see this in other cities, so we find this displacement going on. And we'll find all kinds of tactics being used. Think of the way in which eminent domain is being used in this country. You have another example where people say, well, land should be under its highest and best use, and sorry, that working class neighborhood is not under its highest and best use. What did Engels say? Yes, we can zap it to that community, we can get rid of them and transform it into some sort of... And Engels' description of this is exactly what is going on in a lot of American cities right now. So you go from Mumbai to Sao Paulo to Mexico City and you find this global process going on. And in China, the dispossessions are absolutely astonishing. 3 million people are being displaced in Beijing over the last couple of years, 2-3 years, in part for the Olympics, but also because they're living on high-value land and it's needed for a new form of urban development, and people are being shunted out, and the city is being completely reorganized along these kinds of lines. This is the way in which the surplus is being absorbed. That is, it's being absorbed partly through this massive building project, but at the other end of it, it's being absorbed by this massive land grab, this accumulation by dispossession, as I call it, which is going on at the other end of the scale. And there's a connection between the two. You cannot have all of that wealth accumulating at this end of the scale without this sort of desolation being constructed at the other end of the scale. And this seems to me is the crucial thing we have to start to look at. We don't connect. And I got furious the other day. I was up at Columbia University where they, you know, Jeffrey Sachs has infected them all with the idea that they're going to abolish poverty by 2015. And you're going to abolish poverty by 2015 without in any way interfering with the accumulation of wealth. Go figure. I said, you're talking about the wrong thing. You shouldn't be talking about the abolition of poverty. You should be talking about the abolition of the accumulation of wealth. And they all looked horrified. They said, well, you know, you mean me? And I said, yes, us. You know. And this is the uneven, you know. And you go, you know, I'm tired of all these post-structuralists telling me that class doesn't count, you know. I mean, it's kind of so ridiculous. Here you have a situation of this kind, where it's so patently obvious, but you've got to connect. And it's so interesting. You look at the media, did they connect all of those foreclosures with the Wall Street bonuses? I didn't see anybody connecting it and saying, oh, there's a real connect here. Has anybody connected the way in which, for example, people have been dispossessed of their pension rights in this country over the last 10, 15 years? With the fact that there's an enormous accumulation of wealth going on amongst the few CEOs. And if you kind of say, well, actually, where did that wealth come from? Whose wealth was it that got stolen? We now live in a very predatory society where wealth is being stolen, assets are being stolen and written down. And I wouldn't mind betting that in exactly the same way that Katrina managed to clean out certain neighborhoods in New Orleans, that then the property developers kind of looked upon and said, yum, yum, that's great, now we can go in and do something else with it. So all the new urbanists start rushing in there with vast amounts of finance to reconstruct it in a kind of a little Disneyland or something like that. It wouldn't at all surprise me if people start to look at this pattern of foreclosed neighborhoods and say, isn't it interesting? That's actually quite high-value land. Isn't it interesting? We can now put the box stores. We don't need eminent domain anymore. We've got the foreclosures that have done it for us. Isn't it interesting? Engels would have made a meal of that. We should make a meal of that. We should be prepared to talk about these kinds of ways in which it's occurring. At the same time, there is this other problem, which is a political problem. That the scale at which urbanization is occurring is really changing the arenas in which politics is required and politics becomes possible. One of the dilemmas right now, and this is true of many of the social movements I know about, is that many people are so intimidated by this incredible global phenomenon that the only thing you can think of doing is saying, well, we have to retreat to neighborhood local politics. That's where things can happen. That's where we're in control. That's where we can do things. I'm not against local neighborhood politics. I think they're great. I think they're foundations for something very important. But the issue for the right to the city movement is how to take all of those movements of that kind and then have a global perspective and say, we have to do something about this massive process of accumulation of wealth that's going on through the urbanization dynamic. And let's connect. You know, there's a tendency to kind of say, well, urbanization is over here and economics and national economies are over there. That's not the case. They're integral to each other. And I think in the whole history of capitalism, when I kind of say you cannot understand the whole history of capitalism and how the surplus has got absorbed and how the surplus has been deployed without understanding the class character of urbanization and the way in which that class character is actually articulated through using urbanization projects as a way to absorb the surplus product, as a way to absorb the surpluses. So that you get these crazy products like Dubai. You get these crazy urbanization processes like in Santiago or in Seville or wherever you go. I mean, you see massive urban projects and you kind of go, what's going on here? There's plenty of things to do with this surplus capital. Why aren't you spending it over there? And why aren't you beginning to think of an alternative politics? For example,